There is a kind of room that exists only to choose. It is bright, and it is warm, and it is full of music, and the scent of hothouse flowers carried in against the season, and beneath all its beauty it is a market, though no one in it would ever say the word aloud. The great ballrooms of the London season were rooms of that kind. A young woman was brought into them to be looked at and to be chosen, and the choosing was done in a language so soft and so cruel that a stranger might have watched a whole evening and never once seen the cut. It was done in who was asked to dance and who was not. It was done in the turn of a fan and the drift of a shoulder, in the small warm circle that opened to take one girl in and closed again before another could follow. The warmth of that room was real, the candlelight was real, and none of it, on the night this story begins, was meant for the young woman standing at the cold edge of it, watching the world be warm without her. Her name was Linnet Aldworth. She was 23 years old. She had come to 11 such balls that season, and she had not been chosen at a single one of them. She stood where she had taught herself to stand, near the tall windows at the room's far end, where the draught came in off the glass and the candlelight did not quite reach. She held herself straight and she watched. It was, she sometimes thought, the only gift the season had left her. She watched the young man cross the floor and bow before this girl and that one, and watched the whole bright machine of the evening turn without her, as though she were a thing the light passed through rather than fell upon. A gentleman came toward her corner, and for the space of one foolish heartbeat something in her chest lifted. He bowed. He asked the pretty fair girl at Linnet's left hand for the next dance, and she glowed and gave her arm, and went off into the light, and the gentleman had not once looked at Linnet at all. She had only hoped, which was a more dangerous thing than expecting. She lowered her eyes to the fan in her hands. It had been her sister's fan. She turned it once, the way a person touches a thing to be sure it is still there. And it was then, with her eyes down on that fan, that Linnet felt the strangest thing she had felt in years. She felt herself being looked at, not glanced past. Looked at with a whole and deliberate attention, the way one looks at a page one means to read to the end. She raised her eyes. Across the entire width of that bright and crowded room, past every beauty in it, a man was watching her. And he was the one man in all of London from whom such watching should never have come. He stood tall and still amid the movement, dressed darker than the rest, and the crowd had arranged itself around him the way a room arranges itself around a thing it fears. She knew him at once. Everyone knew him. He was the Duke of Ravenshold, the man who had chosen no woman in 7 long years, who walked through every season like a cold star crossing a warm sky. And he was looking at her. And as she stood there, unable to draw a breath, the Duke of Ravenshold set down his glass and began to cross the room toward her. To understand why no one chose Linnet Aldworth, you had first to understand her name, for the name was the whole of it. There had been a time, and not so very long before, when the Aldworths of Marin Hall had been a good and quiet family of the middling gentry. Not grand, not rich, but respected in their own county, and welcome, if never celebrated beyond it. That time had ended 7 years ago in the spring, in the space of a single season, in the loudest scandal London had given itself to in a decade, and it had ended, as the worst things do, upon the person least to blame. Linnet had a sister once. Her name was Amabel, and she was everything Linnet was not, which is to say that she was chosen, and chosen early, and chosen by the greatest prize the season had to offer. Amabel Aldworth had been the loveliest creature 3 counties had produced in a generation, and the young Duke of Ravenshold, newly come into his title and not yet cured of his own heart, had crossed a room very like this one, and chosen her before all of London. She was 22. For one bright season the poor gentry girl from Marin Hall was to be a duchess, and the world had smiled upon it, the way the world smiles upon a thing it means in the end to devour, What happened next Lynette had gathered over 7 years from the scraps the world let fall, for she had been a child of 16 when it broke and had been kept from the worst of it. This much the world agreed upon. There had been a letter. There had been money that moved in a way money should not. There had been a night and a room and a witness, and by the morning after that night, the loveliest girl in England was no longer a bride but a byword. The story the world settled upon was the cruelest one on offer, and therefore the one it held to most fondly. Amabel Aldworth, it was said, had never loved the Duke at all. She and her grasping family had schemed to trap him for his fortune, had overreached, had been caught, and had got no more than such people deserve. The Duke had been made a fool of by a scheming girl and had wisely cast her off. The Aldworths were fortune hunters unmasked. None of it was true. But the truth, Lynette had learned, is a quiet thing, and a lie made loud enough will drown it as surely as deep water. Amabel did not live to see the lie grow old. She died the winter after her ruin, of a fever the physicians named and a grief they did not, 23 years old, the very age Lynette had now come to, which was a thing Lynette tried not to think of and thought of without cease. Their father followed within 2 years, his health and his good name gone down together. Marin Hall was let to strangers. And Lynette, the younger sister, the forgotten one, the child no one had troubled to ruin because no one had thought her worth the trouble, grew up in a narrow house in an unfashionable town on the last of a broken family's money, carrying a name that every drawing room in England had already closed against her. An aunt with a great deal more duty than warmth had brought her to London for the season, out of a grim conviction that the girl must be got off somebody's hands. It had been a cruelty, dressed up as a kindness, for there was no house that would receive an Aldworth without a chill, and no man living who would be seen to choose the sister of the girl who had shamed the Duke of Ravenshold. That was the fine cruelty of Lynette's position. Of all the men in England, the one whose notice would complete her ruin, the one whose house had the most reason to loathe her very name, was the Duke himself, which was why when the Duke of Ravenshold set down his glass in that bright and crowded room and began to walk toward her past every beauty in it, the one person most certain that it could not be happening, that there had been some mistake, was Lynette Aldworth herself. He crossed the room slowly, as a man crosses who has never had to hurry, because the world has always waited on him, and the world waited. Now the nearer he came, the more the evening seemed to hold its breath. The musicians felt it before they understood it, and the music thinned and faltered. The dancers slowed. Fans went still. By the time the Duke of Ravenshold reached the cold end of the room where Lynette stood alone against the dark windows, half the great ballroom had turned to watch, and the other half was turning, and every soul in it was thinking the very same thought. Now we shall see the Aldworth girl cut at last, and cut by the one hand with the most right to do it. For that was the only thing such a man crossing such a room to such a girl could mean. He had come to deliver in person, before the whole of them, the blow that would finish her. It was a delicious prospect, and the room composed itself to enjoy it. He stopped before her. Lynette, who had learned in 7 hard years never to let them see her flinch, lifted her chin and met his eyes, and waited to be destroyed. His eyes were gray, a pale and level gray, and they rested on her with an attention so complete that the din of the room seemed to fall away from the edges of it. He did not look like a man about to be cruel. He looked like a man reading something written very small. Then the Duke of Ravenshold, before the whole of London, bowed to her. It was not the sketched and grudging thing a great man gives where he must. It was a full and deliberate bow given slowly, the bow a man offers an equal he respects, and he gave it to an Aldworth, and Lynette heard the breath go round the room like wind through standing wheat. When he straightened, he spoke, and he pitched his voice low, so the words were for her and not for them. "Are you her sister?" he said. Amabel's. The name in his mouth undid something in her that all their cruelty together had never touched. No one spoke Amabel's name to her, no one spoke it kindly, He had said it as a man says a name he has carried a very long way. "Yes," said Linnet, "I am." Something moved behind the still gray eyes, there, and gone again, too swift to read. "I had begun to fear there were no Aldworths left," he said. "I am glad to find I was wrong, though I will tell you plainly, you may not thank me for it before this is done." Then, while she stood struck dumb, he inclined his head once more, turned and walked away, back through the whole staring room. He did not ask her to dance, nor offer his arm, nor do anything the room could carry home and make sense of. He simply walked out of the ball and left behind him the loudest silence London had heard since the last time an Aldworth stood at the center of a room. Linnet did not sleep that night. She lay in her aunt's cold, spare bedroom and turned his words over and over. "Are you her sister? You may not thank me," and could make of them nothing but bewilderment and a strange, unwilling warmth that she distrusted at once. The answer came the next morning, and it did not lift the mystery. It deepened it. A letter was brought to the door by a manservant in quiet gray livery, addressed to Miss Linnet Aldworth, in a hand she did not know. All firm, straight strokes. Her aunt read it first, for her aunt read everything, and Linnet watched the sharp face travel from suspicion to astonishment to a raw and greedy calculation. It was the offer of a position. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenshold, grandmother to the Duke, who had not stirred from the family seat at Wolvermere in Kent these many years, was in want of a companion, and Miss Aldworth was offered the post at generous wages. A carriage would be sent to carry her down into Kent within the week. It was signed with a single black letter R and no name at all, as though the writer trusted that one letter to carry the whole weight of who he was. And it did. Linnet understood none of it. Why the one house in England with the most cause to bar its doors against her name should instead open one. What the Duke could want with the ruined sister of the girl the world said had shamed him, she could not begin to say. She knew only that her aunt, delighted to be rid of her at a profit, would send her whether she willed it or not, and that she had nowhere else in the cold world to refuse it to. So within the week, Linnet Aldworth climbed into a stranger's carriage, and let it carry her out of London and down into Kent, toward a house she had never seen, and a grandmother she had never met, and a man who chose no one and had, for reasons no living soul could explain to her, chosen to notice her. The journey into Kent took the better part of 2 days, and Linnet spent both of them, building in her mind the house she was going to. She built it out of dread, for dread was the only material she had. A man who chose no one, who moved through the world like winter, would keep a house to match. She saw it clearly by the second evening, a great cold pile of gray stone, shut and echoing, its windows dark, the kind of place where a ruined girl might be tidied away and put to whatever use had paid for her. She had braced herself so thoroughly for that house that when the carriage turned at last between a pair of old mossed gateposts and Wolvermere came into view in the last of the light, she could not for a moment make her eyes agree with it. Wolvermere was not cold. It was long and low and old, warm brick gone soft rose with age, and it sat in its hollow among the bare winter trees with lamps lit in a dozen windows and smoke rising companionably from its chimneys. It had the look of a house where people had been happy, which was the last thing Linnet had looked to find, and it unsettled her more than any grim pile could have done. A cold house she could have faced. A kind one left her with no defenses at all. She was met at the door not with suspicion but with a plain, unbothered warmth that bewildered her further. The housekeeper who took her in was a broad, comfortable woman, who behaved as though ruined gentlewomen came up the drive every week, and were no cause for remark. She did not read Linnet's name and go cold. She did not seem to know it at all. She only said the poor thing must be frozen to the marrow, and made a soft fuss over her, and carried her off up a wide, worn stair to a room that stopped Linnet on its threshold. It was not a servant's room. It was a lovely room, low and warm, with a deep window that would look over the garden by day, and a bed turned down, and books, a whole shelf of them, waiting. Someone had put flowers in it, forced white flowers out of a glass house. In January. Someone had thought about the room, and thought kindly, and the thinking had all been done before Linnet ever arrived, which meant it could not have been earned, and could not be paid back, and had been done for nothing at all. She had grown expert, in those years, in the price of things. She stood among the white flowers, and could not find the price of this. There was one thing more, and the housekeeper let it fall on her way out as though it were nothing. His Grace had left an order about the guest. She said only the one. That no person under this roof, family or servant, was to speak a single word to Miss Aldworth of London, or of the season, or of anything that had passed in either, unless Miss Aldworth herself wished to speak of it first. The housekeeper plainly thought it a strange order, and plainly meant to keep it to the letter. She wished Linnet good night and went out, and Linnet, who had armored herself against cruelty and could have met cruelty on her feet, found she had no armor at all for this, and sat down on the edge of the strange, kind bed, and put her hands over her face. She met the mistress of Wolvermere the next morning, and the mistress was no more what she expected than the house had been. She had imagined someone faded and querulous, an old woman put by to be nursed. What she found was a small, straight, formidable person of near 80, with a face like a clever hawk, and a pair of very dark eyes that went over Linnet once, head to foot, and set the whole of her down somewhere for later. Honoria Dowager, Duchess of Ravenshold, had not been to London in a great many years, and did not, she gave Linnet to understand inside the first 5 minutes, regret it, in the smallest degree. "Sit where I can see you," she said. "Nearer. There." She studied Linnet a while in a silence that would have unnerved a bolder woman, and Linnet, who had been unnerved by experts, bore it. Then the old woman said, unexpectedly, "You have her look about the eyes, not the rest." Only the eyes, and before Linnet could understand that it was Amabel who was meant, before she could answer at all, the dowager turned the talk clean away to the garden and the failings of physicians, and did not come back to it, so that Linnet was left to wonder a long while afterward whether she had heard it at all. It was only much later that she understood the old woman had said exactly as much as she meant to, and had said it on purpose, and had then shut the door on it, as firmly as any door in London. Whatever Linnet had been brought to Wolvermere for, the dowager knew it, and would not tell. There was only one other person under that roof who held the answer, and in her first days there Linnet had not so much as seen him. For the first days at Wolvermere, Linnet waited to be told what she had been bought for. It was the habit of those years, and she could not put it down. She read to the dowager in the mornings, and walked the frost-stiff garden in the afternoons, and lay awake listening to the strange house settle, and all the while she waited for the price of her keep to be named, for in her experience, a thing given freely was only a debt whose reckoning had not yet fallen due. The reckoning did not fall. The Duke she had been sent to did not send for her, did not seek her out. She saw him twice in a week, and both times at a distance, once at the far end of a gallery, and once from her window before dawn, riding out alone into the white fields, gone before she could be sure he had seen her. Then, on a still gray afternoon in her second week, she found the music room. It was a small, forgotten room at the back of the house, and there was a pianoforte in it, under a holland cover. And when Linnet lifted the cover, a smell of dust and old wood rose up, that undid her more than any kindness had. She had not sat at an instrument in 2 years. There had been none to sit at, in the narrow house on the last of nothing. She sat now, and set her cold fingers to the keys, and played, clumsily at first, and then not clumsily, some plain old thing her mother had taught her before any of it, and for the length of the piece, Linnet forgot entirely who and where and what she was. When the last note died away, she came back to herself and turned, and the Duke of Ravenshold was standing just inside the door. She rose at once, her face hot, an apology ready to be told she had presumed. He did not let her give it. "Do not stop on my account," he said. His voice was low and even, the voice of a man who had not raised it in a very long time. I heard it from the hall, and could not think what it was. He paused, and something behind the still gray eyes moved and settled. Nothing in this house has made that sound in years, he said. Lynette did not know what to say to that, so she said the truth. I should have asked, Your Grace. I found the room and forgot myself. You are not required to ask, he said. You are required for nothing here, that you were not told of. He said it without warmth and without any edge either, plainly, as a statement of the terms. And then, because she was 23 and tired of not knowing, and because the not knowing had begun to frighten her more than any answer could, she asked him outright. Why did you bring me here? She said. You do not know me. Your house has more cause than any in England to shut its door on my name, and instead here I am, warm and fed, and told that no one may speak an unkind word to me. I have learned to be afraid of what I do not understand, so I will ask you plainly, what is the price of it? For a moment, she thought he might truly answer. Something crossed his face, some pressure from within against the great stillness of him. Then it was gone, and the stillness closed over it again and left the surface smooth. There is no price, he said, and when she only looked at him, unbelieving, he added, Lower still. I know you cannot believe that. I would not in your place. You will have to wait and watch no price come, and learn to believe it slowly. That is the only way it can be done, I think. Then he inclined his head and turned to go, and it was at the door that she saw the thing she was not meant to see. He paused on the threshold, the smallest pause, as though he had heard the words she had not said. And watching the set of his shoulders, she understood that the music had reached into him somewhere and taken hold, and that this man who wanted nothing and chose nothing and asked for nothing at all, had wanted, for one unguarded moment, to be asked to stay. He did not ask. He was a very long way out of the habit of wanting things where they could be heard. He went out and left her alone with the open instrument in the failing light, and Lynette Aldworth sat a long time in the cold and understood only this much, that she had come to Wolvermere braced against a reckoning, and that the reckoning she had feared was not the danger in this house at all. The weeks went on, and the price did not come, and Lynette, against the hard training of those years, began little by little to stop waiting for it. She settled into the shape of the days at Wolvermere, and as she settled she began, without meaning to learn the house, and in the learning of it the man, though she saw him seldom and spoke with him more seldom still. She learned first where the money went. As companion to the dowager, she kept the old lady's accounts and wrote her letters to dictation, and so a great deal passed beneath her eyes that had not been meant for them. She noticed being poor, and the poor notice money, the way the hungry notice bread, that a good deal of it left Wolvermere and did not come back, and by careful and nameless ways. Sums went each quarter to a lawyer in the county town with no reason set against them, and to a parish fund 3 counties off, where the family held no land and knew no soul. The money moved the way water moves underground, surfacing far from where it went down, and never once with the name of the Duke of Ravenshold upon it. She came upon the first of them by chance, on a raw, bright morning, when she walked into the village on an errand of the dowager's. A grave young woman stood at the well with a plain gold ring, and the neighbor beside her dropped her voice as Lynette passed, in the way people do over a thing half shameful and wholly delicious. Lynette caught only the shape of it, but she knew that shape, having lived inside it. The young woman had been in trouble 2 years since the oldest trouble there is, turned out and gone in disgrace, and had come home a 12-month later a married woman with a steady husband and a place of her own 40 miles off, and none could account for how. She had not merely been rescued, she had been settled, respectably and for good, as though some hand had reached quietly down and unwritten her ruin. The village left off trying to explain it. Lynette did not. She met the second one face to face, and that one she never forgot. She had walked out beyond the village to carry a basket to a widow named Larkin, whom the dowager pensioned, who lived alone at the edge of the common. The widow was glad of company, and talked as the old and solitary talk. And somewhere in it she came to her boy, her Jonas, and her voice changed. Her Jonas had been taken up 3 years back for a robbery off the turnpike, a thing he never did, but a watch was found, and a man swore to him, and the whole of it looked black as pitch. A poor woman's son, with the whole weight of the law against him, does not commonly walk free, whatever the right of it. But a stranger had come, and paid for a sharp lawyer out of London who pulled the false thing to pieces in an afternoon, and had her Jonas home by nightfall, and had left no name behind him, and asked for no thanks. But I saw him, the widow said, and dropped her voice, though there was none to hear. There was a tall, dark gentleman at the back of the court the whole day, that no soul there could name, still as a fence post. And the moment they set my Jonas loose, he was up and gone before the words had finished. I went after to bless him, and there was only the empty street. And the next winter, when they tried the wren lad that all the parish knew was innocent, folk say the same dark gentleman was there again, at the back, gone before the end. She folded her worn hands. I could not tell you his name if you paid me in gold, but I know this of him. Somewhere hereabouts lives a man who cannot keep from a court where an innocent soul stands in the dock, and where he finds one, he buys the poor wretch back with a purse of good London money, and slips out before he can be thanked. And I have lain awake wondering what it must cost a man to do that, year upon year, and never once let himself be seen to do a single good thing. By the time Linnet reached the gates, she had understood a thing that halted her on the gravel. She had come believing herself the one strange object of a rich man's unaccountable mercy. She was nothing of the kind. She was one of many, and the many had a pattern she had not seen until the widow's words laid it bare. He saved the condemned, the falsely accused, the whispered down, the scandal ruined, the ones whom a sworn lie or a scrap of black evidence had marked past all help. Those he could not leave alone. Those he drew back in secret from the edge, one after another, and never let his hand be seen in it. And standing cold on the drive, Linnet saw at last where she herself belonged on that long secret list, and why the one house in England that ought to have hated her name had opened its door to her instead. She was exactly the kind of lost and condemned thing the Duke of Ravenshold could not stop himself from trying to save. Let us pause here a moment. If you have found your way into Linnet's story and would like to be here when the rest of it comes, do take a moment now to subscribe, so that the next chapter finds you waiting. It was the dowager who gave her the first true thread of the why, and gave it grudgingly, and gave only a thread. Linnet had said something one evening carefully, of how much quiet good the parish fund seemed to do, and the old woman looked up sharp from her cards and held her with the very dark eyes a long moment, weighing her. "He does not do it for goodness," she said at last. "Mark that, if you mark nothing else. A good man gives and is glad of it. My grandson gives and is paying, and they are not the same country, and he has lived so long, in the second he has forgotten the first is even there." She was quiet a moment. There was a time he was the warmest creature you could imagine. He loved aloud, once, in the teeth of the whole world, and the world made him sorry for it in a fashion I will not describe. He drew from it the lesson that his wanting was fatal to the thing he wanted, and so he gave up wanting where any eye could see, and then gave up wanting at all, or taught himself to believe he had. She looked at Linnet with something close to a warning. All these years I have watched him keep that bargain, and it is the cruelest thing I ever saw a man do, and he does it to no soul but himself. No one can break it for him, but the one person he will never again let near enough to try. "What was done to him?" said Linnet, scarcely breathing. But the dowager had come to the edge of what she would give, and took up her cards again, and her old face closed like a fan. "That," she said, "is his to tell. if ever he tells it, which I do not look to live to see. Only do not mistake what you are living beside, girl. Whatever else he is not safe, and neither, I begin to think, are you. The winter drew on, and without either of them ever consenting to it, a shape formed in the days at Wolvermere, and the shape formed around the music. She had gone back the morning after he found her there, half expecting to be told the pianoforte was not for her. Instead she found, propped on the stand, a single sheet of music, an old song copied in the firm, straight strokes she knew from the letter that had carried her into Kent. There was no word with it. There did not need to be. He could not ask her aloud to play a thing, for asking aloud was wanting aloud, and he had forsworn that years ago. But he could leave a sheet on a stand, and let her find it, and let the wanting be carried by the paper, and never spoken. So she played it, and the next morning there was another. That was how it began, and how it went on, all through the shortening days, a conversation carried in music and never in speech. He chose the pieces, and that was the marvel she came to slowly. That a man who chose nothing, who let every question of his comfort fall to other hands rather than own a preference, chose these. Grave old airs at first, then wryer things, and once or twice a thing so tender she could scarcely play it for the ache it put in her throat. A man tells you what he is by what he asks to hear. In the evenings, when the dowager had gone up, he would come and sit a little apart and listen, and it was the least lonely quiet she had known in a long while. She began, greatly daring, to make him choose in the open. She would break off mid-piece and ask him plainly which of two things he would rather hear next, and watch him decline to answer. "It is all one to me," he would say, which was what he said to everything. "Choose for me." And one evening, tired and reckless, she refused him. "No," she said, "I will not choose for you. It is your turn to want a thing aloud, your grace, if only a tune. It costs nothing. No one in the world is harmed by it. Name the one you would rather." He looked at her a long moment across the quiet room, and she saw the old refusal in him, and behind it something that was not refusal at all, and, at last, roughly, as a man lifts a weight he has not lifted in years, he said, "The second. Play the second." It was the first preference she had ever heard him own to, and she played it with her heart going hard, as though something enormous had happened, because in that room something had. He understood the danger of her better than she understood it herself. He had brought her here to pay a debt so old and so heavy that he had believed it past the reach of any complication. Pay it in deeds, see the last of the Aldworth safe, and when the proof was whole give her back her sister's name and buy with it a little of his own peace. It had been a clean design. He had not designed for the music, nor for a woman who would refuse to choose his tune and make him say the second, and mean by it a thing he had sworn never to mean again. There were mornings now when the wanting rose in him so hard that he left the sheet on the stand and walked out into the cold, rather than do what he would repent. He had wanted once, aloud, in the teeth of the world, and it had cost the life of the only other soul he had ever let himself want. He would not spend that coin twice. And still, he knew, in the part of a man that will not be lied to, that the wall he had built was coming down stone by stone, and that he no longer wholly wished to hold it up. There came a caller in the last week of the frost, a Lady Pruitt who visited the dowager once a season, out of duty, and stayed for the pleasure of carrying the visit off as news. She looked at Linnet with a frank, feeding curiosity, and worked round over the tea to the thing she had come to enjoy. "Such a sad, strange man, the Duke," she said, low and comfortable. "One pities him. Though, after that business with the Aldworth girl, one hardly knows how much pity he has earned. She set her whole fortune at him, that one, and was caught out a schemer, and he cast her off quite properly, and the creature died of it within the year. And he has walked about ever since like a man half in his own grave. Well, they made their beds, the pair of them. There is a justice in it, I have always thought." She smiled at Linnet as she said it, and it was plain she knew exactly whose sister sat across the tea from her and was watching for the flinch. Linnet set down her cup with a care that was its own kind of violence, for had she not set it down slowly, she would have thrown it. She had not meant to speak, but she heard herself speak, and her voice came very quiet and very level, the way her father's had gone in the worst of his own ruin, and she had not known until that moment she had the trick of it from him. "I wonder," she said, "that you can speak of a dead girl you never knew and a living man you do not know, and call the guessing of it justice. You were not in whatever room it happened in, neither was I. Neither was a single soul who has since passed the tale from mouth to mouth, as though they held the whole truth of it in their two hands. You have a story, madam. That is all you have. It has been handled by so many mouths that the truth has worn clean off it, like the face off an old coin, and still you spend it as good money. I have at least the grace to know that I do not know what happened. It is a grace I would recommend to you." There was a silence with an edge on it. Lady Pruitt's smile did not fall so much as freeze where it sat, and shortly afterward she remembered a further call to pay and went away, and did not come to Wilvermere again. Word reached him. It always did. There was no note, for he did not deal in notes. There was, when Linnet came down that evening, a news sheet on the music stand, and this one was not copied in his hand, but printed and bought, a costly thing sent for from London, and across the head of it he had written 4 words. For the one who spoke, she kept it with the rest, the whole winter's worth of sheets in the drawer of her dressing table. And she did not look closely at why she kept them, because when she looked closely, a kind of vertigo took her. She had spent years learning not to want things, for wanting was how you were broken. And here she was wanting again, and the wanting had a shape, and the shape was a tall, still man who left her music in the place of words and could no more choose her than raise the dead. She was a fool, and knew it, and kept the music anyway. She did not yet know the whole of what he had done, or what had truly been done to her sister, or that the answer to every question she had carried since the night of the ball lay behind a door at the end of a corridor she had never had cause to enter. She found it the following week, and after she found it, nothing at Wilvermere was ever simple again. She found it on a gray afternoon when the Duke had ridden out and the Dowager was asleep over her cards, and the house was as still as a held breath. Linnet had a letter to leave for him, one of the Dowager's, and she carried it to the study at the end of the west corridor, a room she had passed 100 times and never entered, and she found the door ajar, and she went in, only to set the letter on the desk, and then she did not leave. The desk was covered with the work of a man who has labored long at one thing. There were lawyers' letters in stacks, copied depositions of bankers' ledgers, all of it years old and older, and all of it, she saw as her eyes went helplessly over it, concerned one matter and one name, her sister's name, Amabel Aldworth, written and rewritten across those papers in a dozen hands, the name the whole world had agreed to spit upon, gathered here and guarded like a relic. And beneath the papers, where her hand found it before her mind had leave to look, a small flat case, and in it a miniature of Amabel, laughing, painted in the year before it all, so living that Linnet's knees went. Under the miniature lay letters in a hand she had known since childhood, her sister's own round girlish hand, tied with a faded ribbon, full of love and hope and the ordinary happy nonsense of a girl who believed herself about to be happy forever. He had kept them. For years he had kept them. The letters of the girl the world said he had cast off for a schemer, tied in ribbon in a locked case in a locked room, and Linnet stood over them and could make no sense of it until she turned the last paper on the desk and found the one that made sense of everything, and wished at once. It was a letter, too, in Amabel's hand, or in a hand so like it that only a sister could have told, and it was vile. It was mercenary and cold and knowing, a letter that spoke of the Duke as a purse to be emptied and a fool to be managed, a letter that no woman who had written the loving ones in the ribbon could ever have set her hand to. And pinned to it, in the firm, straight strokes she knew, a single line the Duke had written to himself, perhaps years before. A forgery. I know it now. I did not know it then. She was still standing over it when the dowager spoke from the doorway. "You had better sit down," the old woman said. She had come on her stick without a sound, and stood there, small and straight and terribly tired, looking not at the papers, but at Linnet's face. "I hoped you would not find that room. I see that you have. Sit down, child. I am going to break the last promise I have kept for him, because you have earned the truth by half discovering it, and half a truth in this house is a poison. Sit." Linnet sat. And the dowager, standing, because she said she could not tell it sitting down, told her the whole of it at last. "Your sister did not scheme," she said. "Your sister was chosen honestly and openly by a young man who loved her past sense, my grandson, 22 and never in his life refused a thing, who did not know that the world punishes joy. He chose her before the whole of London, a poor gentry girl over every great match laid out for him, and in the choosing made her a target he never dreamed of. There was a woman who had meant that boy for her own daughter, and had meant it for years, and had spent a great deal to bring it about, and when he chose your Amabel instead, this woman did not weep and give it up as another might. She destroyed the girl who had taken her prize. She is called the Countess of Harrowden, and I will ask you to hold the name close, for you have not done with it." The dowager's voice did not shake, but her hands did. "She had it done cleverly," the old woman went on, "cleverly and cruelly and at a distance, so no thread ran back to her. A letter forged in your sister's hand, the one you have just read, that painted her a fortune hunter to the life. A man paid to be found where he had no business, so a witness might swear to your sister's dishonor. It was a wall of proof, all of it a lie, laid before a boy of 22 already half mad with the shock, and he believed it. There is the whole tragedy in 3 words. Child, he believed it. He stood up before the same world that had watched him choose her, and cast her off, in the fury of a betrayed boy, and the world took its cue from him, for he was the Duke, and if the Duke condemned her, then she was condemned. It was not the forgery that destroyed your sister. Forgeries can be undone. It was that the man who had chosen her turned upon her in public and believed the worst of her before all the world, and she was proud, your Amabel, as proud as you, and something in her broke that winter and did not mend, and she was gone by the spring. Port. Linnet could not speak. The dowager looked at her without mercy, because there was no mercy in any of it to be had. He learned the truth too late to be any use to the living, she said. A few months after, when the fury had cooled and the grief came in, he began to doubt, and being what he is, he did not doubt idly. He pulled at the threads, found the paid witness who had drunk himself talkative, found the forger. He has spent 7 years and a fortune assembling the proof of a thing he already knew in his bones, that he was deceived, and that his believing of the lie was the hand that destroyed the woman he loved. That is, the wound. Not that the world was cruel. That he was. That he chose her, and then unchose her, and both were fatal, and he has decided from it that his wanting is a death sentence upon whatever he wants, and has forsworn wanting altogether as other men forswear drink. He gives in secret to the falsely accused, because he cannot save the one he failed, and he sent for you. Here the dowager's hard old voice gentled for the first and only time. He sent for you because you are the last of them, and because he has carried the debt of your sister for 7 years like a stone in his chest, and because when he heard you were in London refused at every door, he did the one thing he has left himself. He opened his own. There is your warm room, child, made ready before you had asked for warmth. It was never the hiring of a companion. It was a man paying a dead woman what he could no longer pay her living in the only coin he had left, which was you. And Lynette, sitting very still among the papers of her sister's ruin, understood the thing that was worse than all the rest, and it took the breath clean out of her. Every kindness of that whole strange winter, the music, the lit rooms, the order that no one speak of London to her, had been done not for her. It had been done for Amabel, and for an old buried guilt, and for a debt to a grave. The man who had done it had never imagined she might come to matter to him for her own sake, as herself and no one's sister. And she understood, sitting there with the forged letter cold under her hand, that this was precisely what had happened to her, that somewhere in the winter of lit rooms and left music she had fallen wholly in love with a man who was only being kind to her out of sorrow for her sister, and who had sworn on the grave of that sister never to let himself want anything, least of all her, ever again. For a day and a night after, Lynette believed the only bearable course was to go. It is a bitter thing, to a proud woman with little left but her pride, to love a man whose tenderness toward her is an apology owed to someone dead. To stay was to accept that apology every day, mistaking none of it for her own, and to want past it, and to be ashamed of the wanting. Better to be clean about it. She could hand him back the debt he thought he carried, keep the last rag of her pride, and lose herself in some far quiet town where the name Aldworth meant nothing to anyone, and leave him to his debt. She got as far as dragging her small case out from under the bed. Then she stopped, and the reason she stopped was the hinge the whole story turned upon. What held her was not weakness, and it was not simply love. Though love had its hand in it somewhere, it was that a great many evenings of music had shown her the man underneath the debt, and the man underneath was worth more than the debt, and worth a great deal more than her pride. She could not make herself walk out on a man who had locked himself inside a punishment of his own building for years over a wound no living soul had ever thought to try to heal, when she might be the one person on earth able to reach it. She had come here to be rescued. She would stay, it turned out, because she had started to suspect she was the rescuer. And to a woman, stripped of everything, there is no possession on earth like being needed for a thing only she can give. She had buried that certainty with her father. She was astonished to find it still breathing, and so she pushed the case back under the bed and did not look at it again. The turning came sooner than she looked for, and it came, as such things do, in the dark. There was a day, at the very end of the winter, a raw and streaming day of sleet, that she learned only afterward was the anniversary of the day her sister died. He rode out into it. No one could stop him, for no one ever gave him an order, and he gave himself none but that, and he was gone the whole of the black afternoon, and came in after dark soaked through and gray in the face and would suffer no fuss, and by midnight he was in a fever that frightened the house. Lynette did not ask leave to nurse him. She simply went, and no one had the standing or the heart to send her out. She sat up through the worst of it, through the second night, when the fever climbed and the physician came and went away grave, wringing cloths for the burning forehead, holding the restless hand, and listening to a man who guarded every word by daylight spend the whole horde of them at last in the dark, unguarded, knowing neither her nor anything. He begged forgiveness of someone who was not in the room. He said her sister's name again and again, "Amabel, Amabel," in a voice of such raw and boyish grief that Lynette wept to hear it and did not try to stop herself. He was 22 in that fever, standing in the wreck of the worst night of his life. And then, somewhere in the gray hour before dawn, when the fever loosed its grip and the danger with it, he grew quiet, and his hand closed on hers, and he said a different name in a wholly different voice. He said, "Lynette," only that, not the way a man says the name of a debt or a duty, the way a man says the name of the thing he has been forbidding himself. And then he slept, truly slept, and his breathing eased, and Lynette sat on in the strengthening light, with her sister's name and her own still hanging in the air of that room, and knew that something had passed between them that no amount of proud silence afterward could ever quite unhappen. What she did not know, sitting there with his hand loose and warm in hers, was that far off in London, a woman with a smooth, cold face had already heard where the last of the Aldworths had gone to ground and had already begun, pleasantly and without a mark left anywhere to move. The move against Linnet did not come as a blow. It came as a change in the weather, a shift in the air she felt before she could name it. The Countess of Harrowden did not deal in blows. She dealt in the thing that leaves no bruise and cannot be struck back at, and had done it so long and so well that half the county did her cruel work for her and never suspected whose hand had loaded them. She had heard, in the roundabout way that such women hear everything, that the younger Aldworth girl was at Wolvermere. It was enough. She did not know what the Duke kept in his locked rooms, and she did not trouble to find out. She knew only that the one man who had never swallowed the tale she had spent a fortune to make the world believe now had beneath his own roof the one person with the most cause to tear it to pieces, and that the two of them together were a lit match laid to everything she had built, for she had built a great deal. She had a smooth, unlined face and a soft voice and a graciousness so complete that people seldom knew they had been cut until they were already bleeding, and every inch of her ground rested on one buried thing staying buried, that a girl had been destroyed by her contrivance and had died of it. So she set herself, gently and without haste, to see the last Aldworth driven out of Kent and back into the dark she had crept from, and she did it without ever once saying an unkind word aloud. Her whole method was suggestion, a murmur that the Aldworth connection was a sad, sad business, and did one not feel for the poor dowager, saddled in her last years with such a companion, the very sister of that dreadful girl settled so near a man of the Duke's history. A lifted brow, a sentence left hanging, so the listener might finish it herself in the ugliest way, and take the ugliness for her own invention. It was the art of making a whole county think one low thought, and each soul believe it original. Within a few weeks Linnet was no longer, in the mouths of people who had never met her, a paid companion at all. She was something a good deal uglier, and the ugliness fastened to her exactly as the first ruin had fastened to Amabel, threatening, left to grow, to bring down not only Linnet, but the old woman she served and the man who had taken her in. The proof of how far it had gone came with the cards for the county ball. Every year the county gathered at the assembly rooms in the county town for the chief ball of the season, and every year the Dowager Duchess of Ravenshold, though she had not stirred to it in a decade, was sent the first and most deferential card of all. This year the card came, as always, addressed to the Dowager, and beside it, where such a card had always named the lady's companion, as a matter of course there was a small and eloquent nothing. Linnet was not named. It was done so smoothly, a careless eye would have passed it over, and it was as plain as a struck blow to anyone who could read, and the Dowager, who could read anything, went white and then dangerously calm. "So," she said, "we may keep our own door, it seems, but not our guest." And she stood the card upon the mantel where she might look at it, and looked at it a long while, and Linnet, watching her, understood two things at once: that she herself was the whole cause of the hurt in that proud old face, and that the one decent thing left her, the thing she had refused a month before, was to go, before her presence cost the only two people who had been kind to her everything they had. She went to him that evening. She had never once in the whole winter sought him out to speak of a thing that mattered. She sought him now. He was in the study, the candles lit, her sister's paper spread beneath his hands, and he looked up when she came in, and something moved in the still face and was swiftly mastered. She made herself say it plainly, the whole of it, because he was a man who trusted only what was real, and a plain truth plainly said was the realest thing she had to give. "You must let me go," she said. "You know what is being said, and who is saying it. Your grandmother has been struck out of her own county's ball on my account, at her age, after a lifetime. That woman means to ruin the three of us, and she will manage it, for a lie in the right mouth cannot be answered. I found the room, Your Grace, and your grandmother told me the rest. I know what was done to my sister, and what you did, and what it has cost you every day. For 7 years, I know this was never a post. It was a penance, and you have paid it over and over, and I release you from it. Let me go, and let the talk go out of the house with me, and keep your grandmother, her friends, and yourself your peace. It is the last thing I can do for any of you, and I am asking you to let me do it." There was a long silence, and it was unlike the other silences. She watched him rise and come round the desk and stand before her. So close she had to lift her face to his, and she saw in the gray eyes the whole of the wound the dowager had named, and something more now, something not there on the first cold morning that had grown all winter in a room full of music. "No," he said. It was one word, low and rough, and it plainly cost him more than another man's whole oration, for it was less a thing spoken than a wall he was pulling down with his bare hands. "No, you will not go." He drew a breath, and the words came slowly, the way words come to a man reaching for a language he has let himself forget. "I told you there was no price, and that was true," he said, "but it was not the whole of the truth. And I have let you carry half a truth all winter, because half a truth cost me less. When I brought you here, it was for your sister. I will not lie to you about that, having lied about enough. It was a debt and a penance, a thing I could bear, because debts and penances are the only things I have let myself carry for years. But it stopped being that a long while ago. The evening you would not choose my music, and made me say the second aloud." He paused, as though the memory were hard to hold steadily. "I made myself a rule once," he said, "and I will tell it you. Since you have found out everything else, I decided that whatever I let myself want, I destroyed. I had my proof. The one time I chose a thing openly and wanted it aloud before the world took it and broke it to teach me better, and she died of my choosing and my unchoosing both. So I stopped. I did not only stop wanting your sister. I stopped wanting anything at all, anywhere a soul might see, because the wanting was the thing that ruined. 7 years I kept that rule, and told myself it kept others safe, and it kept no one safe. It only kept me out of my own life. And then you came into this house and made it ring, and I broke the rule without ever deciding to, because I want you, Lynette Aldworth. Not for Amabel, not for any debt. For yourself, for the woman who threw an old cat's cruelty back in her teeth over the tea and kept my music in a drawer, and thought I did not know I knew. I know everything that happens under this roof." She could not speak. She, who had done the whole winter speaking, stood in the study and could not find one word. "You see how it is," he said, and the ghost of something crossed the hard face. "It is a great deal easier to tell another soul to want things aloud than to do it oneself." He was quiet a moment. "My name is Gideon," he said. "No one has used it in 7 years. I find I have missed it, and did not know that I had. I should like to hear you use it, when you are ready. There is no hurry. We have, I hope, a great deal of time." Then the softness went out of him, and a settled iron took its place. "As for Harridan," he said, "she has staked her whole life on the certainty that I will do what I have always done, which is nothing. She is about to learn she staked it on sand. I have had the proof of what was done to your sister these 2 years entire, and kept it locked in a drawer out of the same cowardice that kept me quiet, telling myself that to bring it into the light would only tear your old wound open to no purpose, since the dead cannot be handed back their lives. I called that mercy. It was not. It was the last dark corner of a man too long used to the dark. I am coming out of it. Go up now, and do not speak to me again of leaving. For the first time in years I am certain of a thing, and I mean to do it where every last one of them can see." The night of the county ball, the assembly rooms in the county town were lit and warm and loud, and full to the walls with everyone who was anyone for 30 miles, and every one of them had come burning with the one story that mattered, the story of the disgraced Aldworth girl and the cold duke who had taken her in. The Countess of Harrowden came to it certain, at the height of her power, that she had already won. She had reason. The girl was not even invited. The old aunt had been snubbed in her own county. And the Duke, everyone knew, was not a man who fought for anyone. He would come, if he came at all, and stand at the edge of the room as he always stood, cold and closed and useless, and let the tide carry the girl out to sea. The Countess had built her whole design upon the certainty that the Duke of Ravenshold would do nothing, which was the surest wager in England. She swept into the rooms in her finest and was received like a queen, and let fall, greeting this one and that, the smallest sighing mention of the sad Aldworth business, and watched it do its work, and was content. Linnet had not wished to come, she had not been asked, and to walk uninvited into a room that had shut its door on her was to invite a public cutting of the cruelest kind. But he had asked her to come, not written, asked aloud in his rough relearned voice, and she found she could refuse him nothing when he spent his hard-won words upon the asking. So she came, on the dowager's arm, in a plain good gown and with her sister's fan in her hand, into the long, bright rooms, full of the very people who had passed her over all her life, and she held her back straight, and she waited to be cut. And she was cut, thoroughly, by 100 people at once, the shoulders turning, the small cold spaces opening around her as around a thing diseased. She bore it. She had borne worse. She fixed her eyes on the far wall and bore it, and beside her, the dowager bore it too, fierce and upright, and near 80, the two of them standing in their little island of empty floor, while the whole glittering room flowed and sparkled around them and would not touch them. And across the room, the Countess of Harrowden smiled her smooth, pleasant smile. And then the Duke of Ravenshold crossed the room. The people nearest did not at first understand what they were seeing, for it was the second time in the story that this man had crossed a crowded room toward this woman, and the first time, at the season's opening, he had done it, and then walked away and left them all baffled. They supposed some second coldness. Now they made way for him, as they always made way. And he came unhurried, past every beauty in those bright rooms, past the daughters of the great houses in their silk and their jewels, past the Countess of Harrowden herself, who turned her practiced smile upon him as he passed and found that he did not so much as see her. And he came the whole length of that watching room to the small, cold space where the only lady no one had chosen stood straight-backed and waiting to be destroyed, and he stopped before her, and he took his place at her side, deliberately, so that the little island of shame now held a duke, and the making of it a shame suddenly cost the whole room something it had not reckoned on. Then he turned and faced them all, and did the thing no soul in that county had seen him do in 7 years. He spoke. He spoke aloud to all of them, and his voice, rough at the first word and steadying after, carried down the long room into a silence that dropped like a cloth over the whole assembly. "You have all been very busy this season," he said, with a story. "I have come to give you the end of it, which not one of you knows, because I kept it from you, and that was cowardly, and I have done with cowardice. 7 years ago a girl was destroyed in rooms very like these. Her name was Amabel Aldworth. Some of you were here, some of you helped. She was accused of scheming, of falseness, of every low thing. And there was a letter in her own hand to prove it, and a witness sworn to her shame, and it made a wall of proof. And I, who was young, and had chosen her before the whole of you, and loved her past my sense, looked at that wall and I believed it." He let the words fall into the dead quiet. "I turned on her before this county. I unsaid my choosing of her in public, and because I was who I am, the county took its lead from me, and she was ruined past saving, and she died of it the winter after, 23 years old. And I have known these 2 years past, any doubt with the proof in my own 2 hands that every last thread of it was a lie. The room had stopped breathing. He drew a packet of papers from his coat and held it up where they could all see it, and no one so much as stirred. The letter in her hand was forged, he said, and I hold the forger's own confession, sworn and witnessed, naming who paid him to make it. The witness was bought, and I have his account of who bought him. Amabel Aldworth never schemed, and never fell, and never did one thing this county condemned her for. She was undone by design, out of jealousy and out of ambition, because I had chosen her instead of another, and the one who ruined her has spent 7 years being received as a queen upon the strength of a grave she dug with her own hands. He turned then without haste and looked full at the Countess of Harrowden, and he spoke her name into the silence clear and unhurried, so that not a soul could pretend to have misheard it. It was Lady Harrowden, he said. She did this. I can prove it in any court in England, and I mean to. There is a quiet that falls heavier than any uproar, and it fell now across those long, bright rooms. In the middle of it the Countess of Harrowden stood alone, her pleasant smile gone from her face at last, and one by one, slowly, every head in the assembly turned toward her. She had spent her every day upon a dead girl's name in a covered pit, and the pit lay open now in a duke's hand before all the people who counted, and no soft sigh could close it again, and no turned shoulder push it aside. Whatever she had made of herself, she looked in that moment only like a woman who had kept a secret grave for 7 years, and had just been made to watch the earth come off it. She said nothing. There was nothing left to be said. She took up what remained to her and walked out through a crowd that parted before her as before a leper, and in the weeks that came the doors of that county swung shut at her back one after another, precisely as they had once swung shut on the sisters she had ruined, and Linnet, watching her go, found no joy in it anywhere. Only the tired old rightness of a thing long buried coming up into the air. At last, but the Duke was not done, and the last of it he did for no cause but one. He turned back to Linnet there in the space that was no longer cold, before every watching eye in the county, and he took her hand, the man who had chosen nobody in 7 years, and he said, "Lo now," but not so low that the nearest could not hear it, and carry it out into the whole listening world. I chose her sister once, and was made to unchoose her. And it broke me, and I swore I would never choose again. I was wrong in that, as in the rest. He looked at no one but her. "I am choosing," he said. "Now, in front of all of them, let them make of it whatever they please." Annabel's name was made clean again, that spring, not with any noise, for the noise was long over, but in a small plain room with lawyers and papers, and the whole weight of a duke behind every signature. At the end there was only a single sheet, dry and cautious as such sheets are, declaring Miss Amabel Aldworth of Marin Hall falsely accused, guiltless of all that was laid against her, her honor and her family's given back entire. Linnet read it through in the music room one gray morning, with Gideon at her shoulder, and the careful little words gave her back the sister the world had stolen, and something in her that had been held shut and dry for years came open all at once, and she wept. He did not reach for a way to mend it. He only drew her against him and let the weeping run its course, and offered not one word, for there was no word the moment wanted, and that plain, wordless holding was worth more than any speech he could have made. "She died believing you thought her false," Linnet said, when she could speak at all. "That is the peace I cannot bear. You have handed me her name back, and she is 7 years in the ground, and cannot take it. She went out of the world, sure. The man she loved had turned his face from her before everyone, and never once turned back. No," he said, "she did not." Linnet lifted her head. "I went to her," he said, and the grief in his low voice was years deep, and had not worn at all. "The first doubt came a few months on, and I could not lie down under it, so I pulled at the story, and it came apart in my hands, and the hour I knew in my heart I had been played, I rode to her with no proof yet, nothing but my own certainty, which the world had already taught me to value at nothing. She was far gone, the fever had her and the sorrow beneath it, and there was little time. I knelt by the bed, the very man who had wrecked her, and told her I knew now she was innocent, that I had been made both a dupe and the instrument of her ruin, and that I would spend whatever life I had proving her clean, however long it took. I had nothing to give but my word, and my word had brought her nothing but harm. I gave it anyway, and she forgave me. She had every right to turn her face to the wall, and forgave me instead, with the breath she had left, and asked me one thing only. Not for herself. There was no longer any such thing to ask. She asked me to see to her little sister, to keep the child safe when the day came, whatever it cost me. She is 16, and she has no one, Amabel said, and the world will forget her until it recalls her only to be cruel. Do not you forget her. And I promised that I would not. He was quiet a moment. That is the true bottom of why I sent for you, he said. A debt to your sister, and a penance for my own sin. Those were the upper layers, real enough. But the oldest thing under them was a promise made to a dying woman that I would not let the world do to you what it had done to her. I kept it clumsily, letting you believe yourself. A stranger, I owed nothing, when in truth you were the one charge, the only other person I ever loved, had laid on me at the end. She knew, Lynette. Before she died, she knew that I believed her. It gave her back neither her name nor her life. But she did not go into the dark, thinking not one soul on earth had believed her, and I made certain of that before the chance was gone forever. Lynette wept again, and it was a wholly different weeping from the first, and when it was spent a great weight of the old grief had gone out with it, and left behind a thing she had not known in years, which was quiet. He asked her, in the height of the summer, in the music room, where the whole strange story had first begun to turn, at great pains, she should not mistake it for one more duty discharged. I have given you back everything that was taken from you, he said, your sister's name, your own footing in a world whose good opinion is not, in my experience, worth a great deal. You are free, Lynette. Every door in the county will open to you now, and you stand in no man's debt. I saw to all of that before. I would let myself say a word of this because I will not be taken out of gratitude nor need nor for want of anywhere else to go. That is exactly why I can ask you clean, which I could never have done in the winter. He stopped, and she watched what it cost him, this man who had rationed his wanting to nothing, all that while, to lay the whole of it down between them. I broke one rule for you, he said, and have not broken it again, and do not mean to. I am going to want a thing out loud, say it plainly, and let myself have it, if you will have me. I would rather choose you and stand to lose everything than keep myself safe and hollow to the end of my days. So I am choosing. Will you have me? Lynette Aldworth, who had come into Kent with all she owned in one small case and no mourning ahead of her worth the name, stood in the room where a locked-up man had first left a stranger, a kindness he could not say aloud, and made a choice that belonged wholly and only to herself now, freely given, out of no fear and no want of anything. I will, she said. I will, Gideon. It was the first time his name had been in her mouth, and she saw plainly what it did to him to hear it. I kept your music, she said. Every last sheet you left on that stand, the whole winter through, folded away in a drawer before ever I let myself know why. She lifted her hand and laid it against the hard, still face, the first time she had ever touched him with them both awake to it. You gave me my sister back, she said. But you gave me a better thing first before ever her name, and you gave it without a syllable. When you had a warm room stand ready for a stranger, you owed nothing that any eye could see. You gave me back the belief that a kindness could be nothing but a kindness with no hook set in it. I had lost that, and of everything I lost, it was the worst, worse by far than the name. You handed it back with a lit room and a page of music, and no reckoning behind it, before you could have known the first thing about me. That is the man I mean to marry. Not only the one who broke his long silence in a blazing crowded room, though I love him too, the one who left the music on the stand. They were married at Wolvermere as the summer turned, without ceremony to speak of, and the dowager kept the best seat and wore throughout the look of a woman surveying a triumph of her own design, which to her last year she insisted it substantially had been. The county doors that had shut against the bride now stood wide, and their owners came and were pardoned on the whole. Linnet wore nothing grand, only a good plain gown, and brought her sister's cleared name up the aisle beside her like something carried home at last out of the cold. They kept a custom, in the long good years that followed, that no stranger to the story could have made the least sense of. Each evening when the day was folded away, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensholt went to the small music room at the back of the house, and she played, and he sat close and listened, and now and again he would ask her for a particular piece by name out loud, without her having to coax it. For he had taught himself to want in the open once more, and found the world went on turning regardless. He came to it by inches, and she never hurried him. He was never an easy man, and never pretended to be. But he became a man who could choose the thing he loved, and say the choice aloud, to the one it was meant for, at the moment it counted, and that was a great deal more than the world had ever believed he had left in him. On the wall of that room, framed alone where a great house might have hung a master's canvas, she set the first sheet of music he had ever left her, the old song in the firm, straight strokes, the mute question of a man who could not yet bring himself to ask. No one who came to the house could fathom why a duchess would frame a plain leaf of music and honor it so, but Linnet knew why, to the end of her days. Every fine house in London had looked straight past her, season after season, and had been right to by the only reckoning they kept. And one man who had chosen no one in 7 years had walked the whole length of a bright and crowded room, past every beauty in it, and stopped in front of the single lady no one had ever chosen, and chosen her, out loud, before them all. That was the whole of her happiness, when everything was counted. And the very first time he reached toward her, he did it without one word, in a warm room, with a page of music, keeping a promise he had made to a dying woman never to leave the last of the Aldworths out in the cold.